did it again. It's like my wife said the other day. She's like, I noticed you've been starting off your videos with a sigh. That was totally unintentional, but here we are. I think everybody is sighing right now in one way or another. And I wasn't sure how to start this video off, but to me this is one of the important ones. When I say important, I mean that, you know, it helps me express some important facts in my life, but I know that there will be some gems in here for other people who may be experiencing the same thing. I'd like to start off with one word right now: overwhelmed. Completely overwhelmed with everything that's going on, but not in the world. And I want to clarify these points because I know I've been talking a lot about politics lately. Some people really don't like that factor of, you know, a person that they're used to talking about, you know, life and life in general or hobbies and whatnot, then all of a sudden, over a few weeks, start talking about politics more. But I'd like to let those people know that, believe me, 9 out of 10 times I want to talk about politics, I don't. Probably more than 9 out of 10 times. In fact, I have these ideas I want to share, and half the time I sit down, probably 3/4 of the time I sit down and I say, no, I'm not even going to bother. Just erase my mental notes and just move on. And it's because what's going on right now is just so absurd that it's impossible to address. And I'm not just talking about the president or, you know, American politics. I'm talking about the world issues that we're facing. We are at a crisis tipping point here where everything is going to cascade if we don't get our shit back to, you know, if we don't get on at least some common ground in this world, then things are just going to decline. But that out of the way, my particular situation, the way I feel overwhelmed, it's not about world issues. I don't get physically angry about politics. I mean, I may be shocked and overwhelmed, and sometimes people say things that just I cannot even believe. With what's going on right now, being an election year at the same time as a deadly virus, which people seem to have completely forgotten about, and others are taking it way too seriously, and some aren't taking it serious enough. Nobody can be on board or have any agreement on what matters. And then we deflect to the protests or riots or something else going on. But completely ignoring the bigger picture, let's just say that we've had in this country for a long time. We have bigger issues: infrastructure, health, healthcare, all these issues that we used to talk about, that politicians used to talk about, are just gone. They're just not interesting anymore. Everybody wants to fight about whether George Soros is funding protests or whether we should go to war in some other country. We've completely neglected the American people. And homelessness, you know, not being able to afford mortgage when you're working 2 jobs, things like that, has put us in a precarious position where Americans are frustrated and angry. And a lot of Americans are. But then there's a large segment of America who is just content to go along their way and ignore the deeper issues. And that's my long way of saying this is why I talk about politics. It's not because I want to. It's not because it's fun or interesting. I don't get ad revenue from it. You know, I don't talk about the hot button topics or the big issues or what Trump said any one day. It's just a coalesced version of all the different, you know, articles I read, headlines I scan. It's like a face palm, what's going on right now. On top of that, I have my own personal life, which, you know, I want to start off by saying I've been through a lot of shit in my life. You know, sometimes I'm always grateful for what I have. And then I think, you know, I've been down a lot of mental roads, mental blockage, physical pain, years of sciatic pain where I had to quit my career. Sometimes I just kind of sweep that under the rug because we tend to forget the things in our life that are negative if we're lucky. There is another side where some people dwell on these things. And that's a really important thing. If there's any one lesson, it's to look at the positive because it's for your own good. Some people think that seeing everything that's wrong with the world is somehow a strength. Like they're woke because they see the world's fucked up. It's like, no, man, you have to create your own reality. So, being overwhelmed right now is no surprise. The way the kids have been home, You know, like I said, I've been teaching my kids from home. We've been, now that school's out, it's of course much easier to not have to deal with that. But then we had the work issue, being out of work and then not being able to go anywhere, being trapped at home. Americans and the people around the world have been facing these issues, and it's causing a lot of tension. It's a good time to start over in your own mind, if you will. And I'm only saying that because I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. I'm with you on it. You know, I can sit here behind the camera and express my thoughts, but like I said, half the time I can't even say what I want to say. I can't even make a video. I can't even talk about this stuff. I'm very grateful for what I have. You know, I'm very grateful for my wife and my kids, my family, my friends. But even then, I tend to take that for granted sometimes. You know, kind of go, I need to hide and isolate sometimes to recharge my brain. And I feel like right now I'm on the verge of a breakthrough. I've been, you know, my creative business, I've just kind of put on hold. I was looking for some better product, but I'm also going on a trip soon for a little while. And I thought, you know, I want to come back full force, maybe get my herb business back on track. But then I started looking at all the other things I do, making jewelry. My wife and I want to fix up and sell buses, which I'd like to take you on a tour of my school bus because I know a lot of you haven't seen it yet. And I have all these passions, all these dreams and ideas, but there's so many different ones that I don't know what to do. It's almost like I have no intention of turning any of my passions into a multi-billion-dollar business or anything. It's just more of just being able to exist. And in today's world, just being able to survive and get by, it's like I have gratitude for just that. Just being able to feed my kids and have a shelter. And I think that because of the fact that most people are in the same boat, that they're just trying to get by, when they see all the politics and bullshit that's going on behind the scenes, that's just sucking more tax dollars, they say, what am I getting for this? And they get frustrated and angry. And so that's why I talk about politics. If you want to get down to the specifics, you could say, well, politics are in every household. Politics don't just relate to government. They relate to your health care, whether you have clean water, whether you can go into a cave and shoot a bear while it's hibernating, which is a law that was just, you know, removed, that protection up there in Alaska. So, you know, you can go shoot animals in their dens now. It's like there are some complicated issues out there that I guess I shouldn't get into that. You know, there's so much division that people can't even talk about things without taking things personal. And that's what fascinates me the most. Often I get a retort if I say something bad about a politician, and somebody will say, what if I said this about this person? I say, I'd agree with you there too. You know, the whole thing is rotten. But enough about politics. That's not really what I wanted to get into. You know, I just wanted to say first off, happy belated Father's Day. I was going to do a video on Sunday about Father's Day. Happy belated solstice, you know, the first days of summer the other day. And it was like Saturday night, I think, and I was in there listening to heavy metal. I was rocking to like Slayer and Seasons of in the Abyss from 1990. And I was listening to all these older songs from a whole bunch of old metal bands and thinking about just how politically charged they really were. And especially one of my favorite albums was, you know, And Justice for All, which was Metallica, and it came out around the same time as Rust in Peace, which was a Megadeth album. And all controversy aside between band members like Dave Mustaine, and they're both great bands, and they were both great albums that were making some pretty interesting political points. That's all I wanted to say. And I feel like back then, metal took on what kind of the political connotation that like 60s music and 70s kind of some punk, which I feel like I'm getting into music here, but hey, that's what I do, right? They could really deal with issues of the time, you know, like war, and like Send Me Your Money by Suicidal Tendencies, which was about, you know, televangelists telling people, hey man, just send me a check and plant a seed and you'll get to heaven. And these things are still happening today. The Jim and Tammy Bakers of today, they're everywhere. I won't even name the people because they're so obviously frauds. But when you see televangelists who can convince people to send them their last check, let's say, and it's a good example for me. If you can convince the elderly to send you your last check, their last check, in hopes of getting into heaven, basically you're one of the most appalling, disgusting people on earth. It's like the worst thing you can do is scam the elderly out of all they have, right? But it's accepted and people praise them and cheer them. Because of this, I see that there is such a, I guess, this idol worship that goes with some people like this. Just the hopes, even though a person has to fool themselves. And that's what's happening in politics right now. Like cult-like atmospheres around people. And it's just, better to just walk away from it, But you can't because you're immersed in it. And the policies affect you. And it's not, of course, it's not the politics of the people or the politics of the politicians specifically. It's bigger issues like prison reform, looking at the fact that the wealthy can bail themselves out and the poor can't. Think about people in other countries. I can't remember if it was Sweden, but there's one Scandinavian country that has a sliding scale for speeding tickets, for example. And I always bring this up because it's the perfect example. There was one billionaire, I believe, that got pulled over and he got a speeding ticket. And it was an article probably like 5 or more years ago. But he said he got something like $1 million speeding ticket. And it made, of course, international headlines because it's like, well, here, if you gave this guy a $300 fine, do you think it's going to stop him from speeding? No. What is the incentive for the rich to follow the laws that the rest of us have to follow? If they can bail themselves out of jail, if they can get out of tickets. And that's an important factor. That's why there's so much frustration and anger. It's not fair. Honestly, the system is rigged. And so when something like this happens with COVID-20, which I call it COVID-20 because as far as I'm concerned, that's when it really hit our country. I know how it works with the discovered in 19, but I say, with that, along with just all the built-up frustration that people have, combined with the internet, and the fact that everything's an echo chamber. I mean, conspiracy theories run rampant during times of crisis and stress. And it's no different today. I mean, there are really people who believe that, say, all the protesters are paid by George Soros. Fine, believe that. I'm not going to argue the point. I really don't care. It's just not worth it to even get into it. Because in today's world, I've seen people posting quotes from people that people never said, that you can obviously look and see that the person never said. I've seen people posting pictures of situations and mislabeling them, using green screens, using, fake images. What is my point? The point is that you have to use common sense right now. You have to understand human nature to know what's going on. And that's difficult because human nature changes under times of stress. We have people out there right now who are saying things like, well, somebody told me that mail-in ballots are just going to all be fraud, so therefore we shouldn't have mail-in ballots. This is something that the other day the president tweeted several times on his Twitter account, mail-in will invite fraud and everything will be rigged. The whole election's rigged. Look, I live in Washington State. We've done mail-in ballots for a few years. Only mail-in ballots. And, hint, it works just fine. It works much better than having people stand in line for hours trying to vote in a booth, unless your intention is to get people to not stand in line for hours and vote, and to just walk away from voting altogether. Because it's my belief that this election the whole system is like every year, gerrymandering, which is, drawing borders where you can, have voting districts to make sure it works in your favor. Damn it, didn't want to get into these specifics. I wanted to talk more about, the pharmaceutical and the corporate side and the tax cuts, but none of that really matters. I don't want to get caught in any of it because people end up playing identity politics. And they go nowhere. What point is it to argue with somebody else about something that doesn't matter? And that's one of the most important things, is to look at a specific situation and ask if it really matters enough to argue. And sometimes it does. I hate arguing. I hate talking about subjects that are controversial. But god damn it, I'm a human being. I have empathy for people. When I see somebody acting like a chump, I call them out on it. I've acted like a chump. Fine. I've made 4,000 videos, and with everyone averaging 10 to 20 minutes, you can imagine I'll say a few things when I'm heated maybe, or that I don't quite mean or haven't thought through. But I generally try to be on top of the things I'm saying. But I've noticed over the years that people get really attached to specific points. So I could make a half an hour video where I say one thing that a person just obsesses on. Back in like 2014 or 15, it was when I was talking about the occult type knowledge and reading Manly P. Hall, and I had a ton of Christians attacking me. I mean, I've never met such scathing people in my life, and all of them claimed to be these Christians, right? God-fearing people that cared about one another. They were on a completely different wavelength from me. I mean, anything that I researched that was not in the Bible was Satan's work. And the reason I bring that up is because I learned how to avoid those people. Don't engage. And this is what I've learned about certain groups of people in politics or in a certain mindset, white nationalists or people who are trying to convince me that whites are superior, let's say. I'll just walk away and I'll disengage from a conversation like that because it doesn't interest me. I believe that human beings are human beings, and I don't really have any interest in talking about the differences, the physical differences or mental differences, because I've met a lot of dumbass white motherfuckers out there. So don't pretend like all white people are superior, right? It all comes down to really what you're willing to engage in, and if you want to argue about race, then you'll argue about race. If you want to argue about politics, you can argue about politics. But, if you want to think that Antifa is behind anything you don't like, this is a complete delusion. It's just non sequitur. Is that the word I'm looking for? So in essence, I come to, some of the people get really caught up in life games, okay? And that comes down to the identity politics of associating with a certain group or believing that you have to fit in. Because of identity politics, people get trapped on one side or the other. And if they speak out against the group, they get isolated. And I'm already isolated because I have liberals who hate me and conservatives who hate me, Christians who hate me and atheists who hate me. Not hate, but you know what I'm saying? I probably hate too, but folks who I disagree with on one aspect, so therefore, if I don't believe everything they believe, then I'm not worthy of their time, which is completely fine with me. All I want is a good life for people. All people. As many people as we can. You remember 2009, 2010? Back in the days when something small would make headlines, and you think, man, the news is bored this week. What happened to those days, right? 10 years, here we are in 2020. It's a very chaotic year. Even if an individual isn't affected directly by all these things going on, they are affected indirectly by the side effect of the rising food prices, the lack of commodities, not being able to go to certain shops or stores. And I don't know. That's why I feel like, nobody's talking about the important issues anymore because there's so many distractions. And the important issues are things like infrastructure, wages, the fact that we've got somebody like Betsy DeVos in charge of schools, this failing school system in America, and how American kids are becoming less and less educated compared to the rest of the world. How we've been stagnating, just sitting in our own shit for so long that it's almost an embarrassment, sometimes to be an American. But then I see a glimmer of hope. I see people who care. I see people who really try to pass new laws or get, signatures, fill out, their whatever it may be that a person does. The fact that people care shows me that there's still hope. Hope that makes sense. There's just so much to talk about, There's no reason to be embarrassed for not knowing things. But it's important that we're constantly re-educating ourselves. It's like an anthill. I feel like when I talk about all humans being important and needing to respect one another, you think about an anthill. I mean, the soldiers don't pick on the workers. I mean, it's important that everybody's there to do their job in order to make sure that things run smoothly. And we're not just casting out a racial group anymore. We are casting a shadow over an entire half of our country right now. When you make the Democrats out to be the complete enemy of the people, I mean, this country really doesn't have much hope at that point. I'm not sure if it was Adams, but one of the early founding fathers or early presidents said that this country should never descend down to a two-party system, a bipartisan system where the only choice is one or two parties. He says if that happens, we're basically doomed. I'd have to look that quote up again, but I've heard that from a few different, early in this country, it was about having the ability for anybody who had the brains and the ability to run for office. And unfortunately, that quickly became obvious that it wasn't happening because, it really comes down to who has the most money. That's the world we live in right now. So, all politics aside, in my own personal life, I have to deal with all this bullshit, plus find my own coherent strategy to tackling, day-to-day life. I feel like I'm on the verge of something here. I need to focus my energy toward one specific thing and just work at it. And that's harder for me, personally, And even talking about it is kind of, why do you guys care, right? But it's more to relate to people who might be in the same situation. Because you often don't even know when you're depressed. You don't know when you're anxious. You can't tell when you're having a good or a bad day because you're just used to whatever system you're placed in. And we could all be happier. My wife and I want to buy land. We want to get out and build a cabin. And it's like, well, that's hard too. But you know what? I don't care about difficulty. I care about satisfaction. Life satisfaction is what's most important. But meanwhile, I'm struggling to make ends meet, and I'm trying to figure out how to, just make basic life happen, just like the rest of us. But having your head together is important, and it comes and goes, and that's okay. So I'm going to go now because I've been rambling for 22 minutes. I forgot to mention my hat. I know somebody's going to ask about this stupid hat. Yeah, I found it at Goodwill a couple years back. It's a Billabong hat from the 80s. And yes, it's horrible, and that's why I love it. It's very tacky. But you want to know how much tackier it could be? This is how you're supposed to wear it. Welcome to 1985, y'all. All I need is some neon MC Hammer pants, which I did used to have a pair. Let's see, a big baggy shirt that says Persian Gulf Yacht Club, which I had one of those too. I was such a dork in the 80s, had a mullet, it was a really good time. And bringing back the nostalgia, like I was saying, when you listen to that old music, it brings back those times. We obsess over nostalgia because it's all we have sometimes. And it helps us to go to a simpler time, right? You hear about it, like I remember my parents talking about, the 60s or the 70s. You always hear how it was so much easier back then. But it really, really was a simpler time. I mean, I think we're destroying ourselves with technology, which was expected, but it wasn't the route I expected. It wasn't a major catastrophic nuclear Armageddon, not yet, or some sort of everybody getting into their own virtual reality worlds and never coming out. No, it was the exact opposite of disconnecting. We overconnected. And that overconnection bred fear and paranoia. And chat rooms where any random person can go post something 1,000 times and people think it's real. And we run with these crazy stories and theories much faster than we ever did before. And it's causing real world impact. And it's fascinating to watch. I mean, things like the Flat Earth Society rising and falling, right? These groups of people who, depending on how stressed out people are, they might start believing this for a while or believing this for a while, and that's fine. But just one aspect, whatever you believe, whatever you think, whatever you want to be true. Just remember we all perceive things uniquely, but we're also in the same reality here, for whatever reality is. And because of that, we have to agree on some basic principles. And arguing whether or not the Earth is flat or a sphere doesn't do much to help us as human beings. It just breeds more paranoia. So that's why I use that example. Or, believing that there's some alien invasion coming or whatever it might be. Every generation thinks that they're the last. But it's only in today's world that, I could actually believe it. You never know. I'm sure humans will continue on for a long time after this. We'll survive anything because we're humans, but, we're like the new version of cockroaches. Got underground bunkers, but if the world comes to that, I won't want to survive anyway. Like I said, I'd stand under the nuke before I'd live in an underground bunker for the rest of my life. But that's a negative way to end a video. Let's see. Too bad. That's what I got. Talk to y'all later. Have a good day.